It is truly time to start thinking differently about the Kansas State men's basketball team.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Happy Wednesday. And if you are like me, maybe slept in just a little bit late in this one, it's because you stayed up for a West Coast absolute historical game. I mean, it was just a classic game. Kansas State taking the win against Arizona State 71-70. If all you saw was the box score, let me tell you, there is a lot more to unpack. And we're going to do that in this episode. We're going to talk about getting into what needs to be done in order for this team to win back in Manhattan against the Jayhawks coming this weekend, because there's plenty to discuss there. We're going to talk about some potential that we saw some with ejections and what's going on with things in the rest of the league and in the conference. And of course, we're going to break down this game. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. It was an insane game, and it was frustrating. It was exciting. It was everything you would hope if you were an actual sports fan in a basketball game. But if you're a fan of one of these two, and obviously in this case, we are talking about Kansas State, there was some frustrations initially at the beginning. As I mentioned, if you would have only saw the box score, you would not known this would have happened. But they started off this matchup in the first 4 minutes of the game down 15-0. Coach Tang had to take another critical and strategic timeout. And just like the last game against Oklahoma State, that they did a fantastic job with, and just what the last time with Iowa State. The Iowa State, I think, was even more important when he took a timeout early to stop the Cyclones' big run. Coach Tang took a strategic timeout, and things turned around. They found a way to bounce back, and they were leading. Kansas State found a way to lead at halftime after being down 15-0. They wound up heading into the locker room up 35-32, and then they wind up winning this one 71-70. But that's not even the greatest of them all when it comes to the heroics or the excitement in this game. This team held on by 1 point, with Arizona State being able to take 2 free throws at the line with only seconds to go in the game. Now, 17-year-old Arizona State player missed both free throws, and there was a nice rebound by Kansas State in order to win the game, and they somehow found a way to hang on. We're going to dig into a little bit more in this game. I want to talk about certain players, especially with some of the comments that Coach Tang said after the game about a certain player that we all are knowing to love over these last few games, especially, and how he thinks there's multiple levels left in his game, which is super exciting. I can't wait to discuss that with you. But overall, finding a way to win this game 71-70, moving to 500 on the season, 11-11 on the year, 5-6 in the conference. Did you expect this team, after being really just subpar at the beginning of the season, finding a way to get this team back to where they are right now? And I know it might be a little immature, or it might be a little too soon to think about the concepts of an 11-11 team possibly having a shot at the NCAA tournament. But what they're doing in the Big 12 right now, which is the toughest conference in college basketball, if you have a problem with that, debate a door. But I truly think what they're doing right now is leading them into a strong potential to find themselves on the bubble come Selection Sunday. I truly do. And if that continues on this Saturday back in Manhattan against the Jayhawks, it's only going to strengthen that resume. If you look at the latest rankings on KenPom, they have moved Kansas State all the way up to number 64 in the KenPom rankings. How many teams make the NCAA tournament? Now, I know they don't go by KenPom rankings, but with the first 4 contests in Dayton, 68 teams make the tournament. Right now, Kansas State moved all the way up to 64 with their 11-11 record. Now, that's pretty impressive. And for the record, they have Arizona State even above them still at 57. So a lot of interesting things moving on the table. When it comes to net rankings, though, and those just kind of updated just a few moments ago before I started recording, they have moved up 3 spots for the win. They're up to 79 in the net rankings across the NCAA. They have they're 2-5 in quad 1 wins that will easily go to 3-5 if they pick up a win on Saturday. The biggest thing that's holding them back in their issues is that they don't have great records beyond the quad 1 wins, and they got to be able to get that. And if they can find a way to do it on Saturday, which we're going to discuss how they can do that, then they're in a really, really good spot. Coleman Hawkins stepped up again for this program. And how cool is it to see the prize possession of the transfer portal really do something for this squad? He had 11 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. And you just love seeing that. He was off early in the game. I think everybody was off early in the game. That's what led to a 15-0 start. But just having that type of play is just really awesome to see. I led with him, but he is nowhere near the best player on the court last night. It was the David Gasson game. It was the game that we were looking for from David Gasson for quite some time. And he has always been an impactful player for this team for quite some time. Not even just this season, for many seasons for Kansas State. But what he did in this game, I mean, honestly, he was the reason they came out with a victory. If it wasn't for David Gasson, for multiple reasons, this team would have lost on the road to Arizona State. Quite frankly, a team that I believe is not as good as these Wildcats, and thankfully the scoreboard reflected that when it's all said and done. But David Gasson ends the day with 36 minutes, which is fantastic. We got to see him play a full game because he wasn't in foul trouble. Only had 3 fouls the entire game. He didn't have to be subbed out a lot. There was some rumors going around that he was dealing with maybe some type of minor injury over the past few games as well. He looked like he was ailing something over the last few games as well. We didn't see that at all in this one against Arizona State, but he was 8 for 11 from the field. He made his only 3-pointer he attempted. He was 5 for 6 from the free throw line, which is something that's very impressive for any opponent against Arizona State, because they do the whole curtain thing. And I mean, it is something that has worked in the past. It has been seen as a distraction, but what has been an issue for Kansas State in the past so far this season being free throws, it wasn't an issue in one of the toughest places in college basketball to an extent when it comes to the whole curtain and free throw attempts. They were 7 for 10 from the charity strike, 70% from there, and that is really impressive. But the Gasson finishing up his stat line, 22 points, 8 rebounds, 4 of them coming on the offensive side, which is absolutely huge. And again, only 3 personal fouls, which I think is even bigger in the aspect. They found a way to keep out of foul trouble all game long. Only CJ Jones had 4 personal fouls when it was all said and done. They only had 15 fouls on the entire game. They did really good when it came to foul trouble. Now, this was a little bit with the refs. They definitely held their whistle back a little bit. Arizona State only had 12 fouls. But overall, I think we're still in this whole conversation. If you've been watching Big 12 basketball at all this season, you'll know that there's quite a narrative when it comes to how the refs are participating and performing this year. And it hasn't always worked in the favor of the Wildcats. But they were really out of it in this one, with the exception of an ejection, which I want to get to in just a moment, that happened with Arizona State. But how great was this team? Gasson, 22 points, as I mentioned. Hawkins with 11. Brennan Hawson, the armadillo. I mean, how crazy was that? The armadillo assassin. They kept calling him on the broadcast. I'll tell you what, there was moments when the broadcast went dark. There was some opportunities where I guess they were having mic trouble. I had a headphone in when I was listening to the game, and it sounded like a bee buzzing, and the feedback, I'm not sure I could hear for about an hour after the game. It was pretty dreadful that they had to they took the broadcasters off the air, and all you could hear was the court, and you could hear the people talking, and it was like you were sitting in the stands. And I much prefer that than hearing the broadcasters. I don't know if you do, but I much prefer that. I hope that in the future they find a way to make that an option that you can choose on ESPN Plus or whatever the case may be, because I would choose that every time. I would rather just watch the game and hear the sounds like you're sitting in the atmosphere than hearing the broadcasters tell you whatever they're going to tell you, especially when you're on the road, man. The bias is just absolutely insane. I think one of the broadcasters said that Kansas State was the team in the blue jerseys, and it drove me absolutely bonkers. I couldn't believe it. But Brennan Hawson, 12 points. He was 4 for 8 from the 3-point line. We didn't see any off dribble mid shots like we have over the past couple games, which to me is really exciting. And again, Max Jones just doing his thing, always there, always finding a way to contribute to this basketball team. And in this case, he was the second leading scorer in the basketball game. 15 points, 6 for 12 from the field. He had 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals. He did everything you absolutely needed to. It was almost like he was a Coleman Hawkins light in that aspect, just stuffing the stat sheet, if you will. It's really cool having 2 of those type of players on the court at the same time. Really cool to see. We saw some really nice play from the players that came off the bench. Moby did really good off the bench. He had 4 points, 4 rebounds. He did have a block as well. He picked up 3 personal fouls. So we only saw him play 13 minutes. CJ Jones only played 11 minutes, but when he was out there, he did good. And then David Castillo only played 3 minutes in the game. That's it. They had a short bench in this one. They only played 8 players, but that's all they needed in order to win the game. Jerome Tang, and they can continue to talk about it on the broadcast, they have simplified this playbook. And I think with simplifying the playbook, that meant that they're also shortening the bench a little bit. So that might mean we see a little bit less of David Castillo. We might see a little bit less of other players as well. But if they're finding a way to continue to win, I don't think you're going to hear anything about that, or nor should you, because that's the objective this season, right? To win the game. I felt differently before this winning streak because I thought the season was over. I don't feel that way anymore. Although I would like to see some of these freshmen, like a David Castillo, get some more playing time. I'm okay with also him taking a backseat and learning from the bench, maybe getting a couple minutes here and there, because there is an opportunity to do something special this season still. And it's exciting. It is very exciting to know that is still an opportunity. I want to get to some comments of what Coach Tang said. Also, I want to talk about a certain player and a certain incident that happened in the game against Arizona State before we move on to looking to this weekend. We'll do all that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, looking for tickets for your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless tickets or ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and I recently grabbed what they call a super deal. It's for a prime seat. I couldn't believe the value. It was an absolute steal, and that's why I continue to use Game Time Picks. The best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guaranteed. You find a better deal somewhere else, and they'll refund you 110% of the difference for wasting your time. Plus, the tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something does come up. So ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. We are very close to 600 subscribers. Hopefully by the time you're listening to it, we are already at the 600 mark, but that shouldn't stop you from clicking that subscribe, because we are going to be covering Kansas State every single day of the week as we continue on this lovely journey of Locked On Kansas State. But for your second listen, you can check out Locked On Big 12. We always have you covered there with everything across the Big 12 conference. That is from college football, college basketball, you name it. Drake Toll and the rest of the Big 12 squad has you covered over there. So check them out for your second listen of the day. It's a really exciting thing happening right now with Kansas State basketball. And I mean on both sides, with the men's and the women. We're really focusing on the men's squad today because they're coming off a huge victory, 71-70 over Arizona State. Now, it's not a huge victory in the eyes of the Big 12 conference standings because Arizona State moves to 3-8 in the conference. But seeing Kansas State moving up to 5-6 after the start that they were on, they started off 1-6 in this conference, going from 1-6 to 5-6. It is a really awesome feeling. And if you look on the thumbnail of this one, I asked the question, is faith restored? And I do really think that you have a way different feeling about this team. And I think it's justified. And I think that if you are feeling like this team can be something special, I think you are absolutely right. I think there is a really good feeling for this team moving on for the rest of the season. Now, is it a sure thing that this team makes the March Madness tournament? Absolutely not. I think as of right now, I think the chances of them making it are still on the outside looking in by a good margin. And I think that's a fair assessment to talk about a team that's at 500 when there is less than 10 games left on the schedule before you hit conference tournament play. But there are plenty of opportunities to still strengthen this resume. And one comes this Saturday against Kansas. I want to get to how I think that this team can defeat the Jayhawks this Saturday and how they can continue their winning streak and their winning ways. But first, I want to talk about a couple things that Jerome Tang said right after the game against Arizona State. First off, I think the biggest thing I noticed and recognized from his speech, he only talked about for about 8 minutes in the presser. And that's really all you needed from this one because, you got to move on. The first thing I talked about when we were talking about previewing this game was this game couldn't be seen as a trap game. They couldn't look beyond this game and focus just on Kansas, knowing that that's right around the corner, right when they get home to Manhattan. They had to make sure they took care of business in this game at Arizona State. And initially, right off the bat, being down 15-0, I questioned if they were looking past this game, if this was going to be the trap game after all. Now, I didn't flood the social media right away. I was patient, which normally is not my SO. I'm normally not one of those guys that am going to be patient. I'm usually pretty impulsive and let my thoughts out there right away. But I stood back because I saw what happened over the last couple games with Iowa State, with Oklahoma State, and even with West Virginia. Now it was a different game with West Virginia. But over the last few games with Arizona State and Iowa State, especially, this team got behind, but they found a way to rebound and bounce back. It was very impressive seeing what they did. One of the main things that Jerome Tang said in his presser was that Dug McDaniel is playing some of his best basketball that we have ever seen. And then he also added this one piece and said, the crazy thing, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said, the crazy thing is Dug McDaniel still has 3 or 4 levels higher of performance in him when it comes to him playing on the basketball court. How exciting is that coming from Jerome Tang when talking about Dug McDaniel? Because obviously we know that there has been some sort of a relationship, a more unorthodox relationship between these two players, this player and this coach in this program. Initially at the beginning of the season, I think we had a feeling that this was going to be a one-year wonder for Dug McDaniel. I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. I think he is going to be the point guard of not only this season, but for the future of this program until he runs out of eligibility. I really do. I think that there is an interesting relationship that has turned into maybe one of the most strongest relationships on the basketball team between coach and player. And that is an exciting thing to have between your head coach and your point guard, the coach on the court. It's really cool. And knowing that he believes that there are multiple levels left in his game, that is super exciting. Dug McDaniel did receive a technical foul in this one, but there was a technical foul and an ejection from the Arizona State squad. Now that is the second ejection from Arizona State in the last 2 games. So the last 2 games, they've had at least a player being ejected in this one. And it was a huge turnaround from Kansas State to Arizona State. Arizona State they had a little bit of momentum, and then that technical foul happened, and Kansas State kind of took back over this game to win. Now, it came down to the final minutes, as we mentioned, final seconds, I should say, with some missed free throws in order for Kansas State to win this ball game. But Dug McDaniel, I feel like there was a moment in this game where the technical foul happened, and I'm not really quite sure exactly why the technical foul did take place, because there wasn't any truly big physical contact. The two players were kind of standing right outside the three-point line and just on the wing, if you will. The referee blew the call and ejected the Arizona State player. I'm guessing the player had something to do with, maybe he said something. The broadcast crew alluded to a possibility of maybe he spit on Dug McDaniel. But regardless of the case, McDaniel was truly upset, and he had to be held back by a couple coaches and some players. I had to rewind it, actually, because at first I thought McDaniel was pushing and getting in an argument and altercation with the coaching staff of Kansas State. But that wasn't the case. It was just a little bit of tension of them kind of pushing him away. That's what it looked like initially. I had to actually rewind my feed and look back to it and then catch back up once with the live feed once a commercial hit. But Dug McDaniel, after being in high tension, they called a technical foul on both teams, kind of just cool down the area. And this all stems from what Arizona State and Arizona did in the game before. So maybe the Big 12 officiating crew just didn't have any leeway for Arizona State in this one. But I keep going back to Dug McDaniel. I think that although his tensions rose, they found a way to cool him down on the court and on the sideline as they were going to commercial break and they got everything figured out. That is one more step for him, knowing that he has taken care of some of the emotions on the court. Now, you want to be emotional. You want to be exciting. You want to be playing with high energy. And I think that there's no question that this team is doing so. But the way he was able to refocus and regroup and get back into the game shows that he is not only going to be one of those players that this team can rely on from a performance standpoint, but I think they're going to be able to rely on him from a leadership standpoint for not only the rest of the season, but for the rest of his career, hopefully at Kansas State, that lasts a long time. He was very close to a triple-double. I don't know, he didn't hit double digits in any category in this game. He was very close to a triple-double. And a couple of players, a couple of people on social media were saying, hey, watch out for this. And he was at 7 points. He finished with 7 points, 9 assists, and 8 rebounds. When you're getting 8 rebounds from your point guard, that is a really cool thing. You had multiple players in this one have a good amount of rebounds. Again, they won the rebounding battle yet again, 2 games in a row. They won 38-34, something that this team struggled with earlier in the season, having an issue at rebounds. They win in a +4 margin, and 6 players had at least 4 rebounds or more in this one. David Gasson had 8. Coleman Hawkins had 6. Max Jones had 5. Dug McDaniel with 8. And then both Hassan and Moby with 4. That's a great feeling, knowing that every player that is coming in and, for the most part, is contributing on the boards. You absolutely have to have that moving forward, as the schedule is not getting any easier, and it won't get any easier once you get the Big 12 conference tournament, and then hopefully when you get to March Madness. Because if they get there, it's not like they're going to have a easy task in the first round of play. You're probably at the best going to be an 11 seed, probably a play-in game. Even if that too, you might have to play in Dayton first. If you're lucky, you might get first 4 in, and then you can just be one of the 11 seeds that don't have to be playing. But that's probably the best case scenario for Kansas State if they continue to win out. Unless they win the Big 12 tourney, then I think that things change, and maybe you're an 8-9, but then you got to play a 1 later on. So things are going to be tough. If they want to make a deep run and continue to make this a special season, by no means is it going to be easy. By no means should it be, because how you started this year off. But that's only going to make the victory sweeter, and hopefully it can continue that way. We just got the 500 on the season, 11-11. In order to get to 500 on the season in conference, to move to 6-6, they got to beat the Kansas Jayhawks at home in Manhattan. I think there is a strong possibility they can do it, but there's some things they need to adjust that they haven't been doing on this road trip. We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Kansas State. And thank you so much for listening to Locked On Kansas State. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, do so. Please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. If you're listening in audio form, this is something I haven't asked for yet and would really appreciate it. Please rate 5 stars on Spotify, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I would love it if you could rate and leave a review. I would absolutely love leaving a review. This is a brand new show, just came out just a few months ago. We're trying to build up the algorithm, if you will, to get more people across the nation, not just Kansas State, but across the nation listening to this show, and to get out the word of how fantastic this program is. So would definitely love to have a review. And if you do, I will read it off on the show. I saw there's already a couple. We'll start reading off reviews on our Friday episodes. So if you do, I'll shout you out. So thank you so much. All right. The Kansas State Wildcats are heading back to Manhattan, and they have to take on the Kansas Jayhawks. Now, obviously, it didn't end well in Lawrence. They wound up losing this one 84-74 just a few Saturdays ago. But there is an opportunity for redemption. That game's going to be at 1 o'clock Eastern. It will be on ESPN. It will be nationally televised. How can they defeat the Jayhawks in Manhattan? Well, first off, with the exception of the Houston game, they have played very well at home against ranked opponents this season. And quite frankly, the entire time under Jerome Tang in his tenure as the head coach of Kansas State. If you remember that game in Lawrence against the Jayhawks, they were down 14-0 in the first few minutes of the game. After those first few minutes, Kansas State came back and then defeated them, really, truly, 74-70 the rest of the way. First 4 minutes of the game, Kansas State 14-0. The rest of the game, the last 36 minutes, Kansas State 74-70. So the biggest takeaway, and I think this is an obvious one, is you have to start off super strong against Kansas in order to defeat the Jayhawks. They almost did it on the road, where this team has not performed well. They finally got their first 2 road wins in their last 2 games against Iowa State and Arizona State, but they couldn't do it in Lawrence. But if they can start very strong in Manhattan, they have a strong chance at defeating the Jayhawks. Now, although they're on this winning streak, the last 2 games, they have not started off strong. They were on a rough start in Ames against against Iowa State. Jerome Tang had to take a strategic timeout in order to get them back on pace. They were down 15-0 in the game yesterday against Arizona State. Jerome Tang had to take a timeout to get them back onto the right path. He said in the press conference this team wasn't in attack mode to begin the game. Whatever the case may be, whatever the problem needs to happen, or whatever is going on with this squad in the first couple minutes, they need to find a way to get rid of that and adjust. Hopefully, as they have obviously a tough travel to get back to Kansas, hopefully they get back to Manhattan and quickly as possible, because going from the West Coast and that jet lag is all those good things happening. Hopefully they can get into a good groove over the next couple days at practice. And I hope they simulate the first couple minutes of the game. Because if Jerome Tang doesn't have to take a timeout, and the energy of this crowd that is going to be in Manhattan on Saturday, if they can carry this team into a huge run themselves, kind of like what we saw in the West Virginia game, I think Kansas State can hold off the Jayhawks and give another ranked victory, another quad 1 win to add to this resume. And right now we're talking about KenPom rankings of this team being currently 64th. Well, right now they have Kansas ranked, I believe, 7th, in KenPom rankings. Iowa State's currently ranked 10th. They were a lot higher when they defeated them on the road. They actually moved down a little bit because of the loss they had to us. But if you defeat Kansas on the road, who is currently 7th in KenPom, let's see, their net ranking right now is currently 7th in net ranking. That is easily another quad 1 win, and that will raise your resume even more. You're back to 6-6 in the Big 12 Conference. That moves you to 500 on that. On the season in conference, the toughest conference in college basketball, and that would put you close to 6 in the Big 12 Conference. That is a good feeling to be at. If you can defeat Kansas and continue this winning streak and finish the season strong. Maybe have a couple good wins against Iowa State later on. Maybe a win against Arizona even as well. This team is well on their way to March Madness, and they might not even be a bubble team. But it all starts on Saturday. It all starts hopefully with a good, strong first 4 minutes. If they can do that, if they can stay out of foul trouble, and they can get maybe one more level of Dug McDaniel. Maybe that was a sign from Jerome Tang, what he said at the press conference, that it is time to step forward. We'll get all your thoughts and then some more on Friday's episode. I'm going to have a guest on, and we will kind of have a last-second preview for the Kansas men's game as we continue on this journey. But until then, thanks for watching. We'll be back here with another episode tomorrow. As always, the women's game is tonight against TCU. That's going to be a huge game. Be sure to check them out. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.